Richard Hale had built an empire from nothing, but he couldn't remember the last time his house felt like a home. At 58, he owned 3 companies, a private jet, and a mansion with 12 bedrooms that mostly stayed empty. His wife had passed away 4 years ago, leaving him with a hole in his chest that money couldn't fill. His son worked overseas and called twice a year. The only sound that ever broke the silence of his enormous house was the soft padding of small feet. His granddaughter, Lily, who was 2 years old and lived with him while her parents sorted out their busy lives. Lily wasn't his by blood through any complicated story. She was simply his son's daughter, dropped into his care because nobody else had room for her right now. Richard hadn't expected to love her the way he did. She had his late wife's eyes, round and brown and full of wonder, and she babbled nonsense words to him every morning like he was the most important man in the world. But Richard worried. He worried about everything when it came to Lily. Was she eating enough? Was she safe? Was the new maid, Maria, actually as kind as she seemed during her interview, or was she just saying the right things to get the job? Maria had been hired 3 weeks ago. She was 26, quiet, always punctual, and came with excellent references from a respectable agency. She cooked, cleaned, and helped care for Lily during the day while Richard worked from his home office, buried in spreadsheets and video calls. On paper, she was perfect, but Richard had learned the hard way that people were rarely exactly what they seemed on paper. His business partner, Tom, had once hired a nanny who looked wonderful on paper too. Sweet smile, glowing references, and it later came out that she'd been neglecting the children whenever the parents weren't home. Richard couldn't shake that story. He couldn't shake the fear that maybe Maria was kind to his face and someone else entirely when she thought no one was watching. So Richard decided to do something he'd never admit to his board of directors, his lawyers, or really anyone with sense. He decided to test her. He would pretend to be asleep. It started small. One afternoon, exhausted from a late night of work, Richard lay down on the living room couch with a blanket over him, eyes closed, breathing slow and even, as if he'd drifted off mid-afternoon. Lily was nearby, playing with wooden blocks on a rug. Maria was folding laundry in the next room. He listened. He heard Lily's little voice humming a tune that made no sense, the clatter of blocks falling, and then, nothing alarming. Maria walked in, checked on Lily, said something gentle like, "Careful, sweet girl, don't wake up Grandpa," and continued with her work. Nothing sinister, nothing cruel, just normal, quiet care. Richard told himself it was a fluke. Maybe she behaved differently when she thought he might wake up any second. He needed a longer test. A real one. One where she had no reason to suspect he was watching. That night, after putting Lily to bed himself and saying goodnight to Maria as she headed to her small room off the kitchen, Richard set his plan into motion. He told Maria the next morning that he had an early flight to catch for a business trip, 3 days, maybe 4. He packed a bag in front of her, made a show of calling his driver, and left the house at 6 in the morning. But he didn't go to the airport. Instead, Richard checked into a small hotel 10 minutes away under a name nobody would recognize, and he waited. He'd installed simple nanny cameras months ago, not unusual for a man in his position. He told himself every parent installed cameras these days, and through his phone, he could watch the live feed of his own living room, his own kitchen, his own daughters, his granddaughters' entire world. For the first few hours, everything was normal. Maria woke Lily up gently, sang a little song while making breakfast, helped her eat without rushing or scolding when food ended up on the floor instead of in Lily's mouth. Richard watched, his coffee growing cold in the hotel room, his heart somewhere between relief and disbelief. This was either an extraordinary performance for cameras she didn't know about, or Maria was exactly who she appeared to be. By the second day, Richard almost called off the whole charade. He felt foolish, lying to a kind young woman, hiding in a hotel room like some kind of spy in his own life. But something kept him watching. Maybe it was the ghost of his late wife's voice in his head, the one that always told him, "Trust, but verify, Richard. You worked your whole life to protect this family. Don't stop now." So he watched. And on the afternoon of the third day, something happened that he never could have predicted. something that would change everything he thought he knew about trust, about loneliness, and about the quiet kind of love that exists in a house that has forgotten how to feel like home. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind that blurs into every other day in a quiet house. Richard was sitting in his hotel room, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun, his phone propped against a stack of room service menus, so he could watch the feed hands-free. He'd grown almost used to the rhythm of Maria and Lily's days together. Breakfast, playtime, a short walk in the garden under the watchful eye of the security team, lunch, a nap, more playtime. It was during the nap that things took an unexpected turn. Lily had been fighting her afternoon nap all week, as toddlers often do, testing boundaries simply because they can. That day, she refused outright. Maria tried everything, a story, a lullaby, dimming the lights, but Lily sat up in her crib, lower lip trembling, clearly working herself toward a meltdown. And then Lily said something that made Richard sit up straight in his hotel chair. "Want Grandpa?" Maria's voice, soft through the camera speaker, answered. "Grandpa's on an airplane, sweet girl. He'll be back soon." "Want Grandpa?" Lily repeated, and this time her voice cracked, tears spilling over. What happened next, Richard would think about for the rest of his life. Maria didn't sigh in frustration. She didn't tell Lily to stop crying or threaten a timeout. She picked her up gently, sat down in the rocking chair by the window, and held her close. And then, quietly, almost as if she didn't think anyone could hear, Maria began to talk. "You know," she said, rocking slowly, "my own grandpa used to call me his little shadow. Did you know that? Every single day after school, I would run straight to his porch instead of going home because home was loud and scary sometimes, and his porch was always quiet and safe." Lily hiccuped softly, listening despite her tears. "He used to braid little flowers into my hair," Maria continued, "even though his hands were big and rough from working in the fields his whole life. He wasn't good at it. The flowers always fell out within an hour. But I never told him because I didn't want him to stop trying." Richard felt something tighten in his throat as he watched. "My grandpa passed away when I was 12, Maria said, her voice steady but quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from carrying old grief gently instead of letting it crush you. "And for a long time, I missed him so much I thought the missing would never end. But you know what I learned, Lily? The missing doesn't mean he's really gone. It means he loved you so much. A piece of him is always going to live right here." She touched Lily's small chest, right over her heart. Lily had stopped crying now, watching Maria's face with the unblinking attention only small children seem capable of. "Your grandpa loves you the exact same way," Maria went on. "I see it every single day, Lily. The way he watches you across the room even when he's pretending to read his boring grown-up papers. The way he saves the crust of his toast for you, because you like it, and he doesn't. The way his whole face changes when you walk into a room, like the sun just came up twice in one day." Richard had to set down his coffee cup because his hands had started to shake. "He's not gone, sweet girl," Maria whispered. "He's just at work, doing boring grown-up things, so that one day you'll have a whole world of opportunities he never had. And the second he gets home, I promise you, the very first thing he's going to do is scoop you right up and probably let you stay up way past your bedtime, because that's what grandpas do." By the end of her words, Lily had drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep against Maria's shoulder. Maria sat there a few more minutes, rocking gently, humming the same nonsense tune Lily liked, before carefully laying her down in the crib and tiptoeing out of the room. Richard sat motionless in his hotel room long after the feed went quiet, staring at a blank screen, tears he hadn't expected running freely down his face. He thought of all his worry, all his suspicion, all the energy he'd spent fearing the worst from a woman who had given his granddaughter nothing but warmth, patience, and a piece of her own healing heart when she thought no one was watching at all. But Richard wasn't finished testing. Not yet. Because what he'd seen wasn't proof of perfection, it was proof of something far more valuable, something he needed to understand fully before he trusted it completely. And later that evening, the cameras would show him something even more unexpected, a glimpse into who Maria really was when she thought she was completely, utterly alone. That evening, after Lily had been fed dinner and bathed and tucked in for the night, Richard watched Maria do something he hadn't anticipated. She didn't immediately retreat to her room to rest, though she'd clearly earned it after a full day of toddler chaos. Instead, she walked through the quiet house, checking that every door was locked, every window secure, moving with the careful attentiveness of someone who took her responsibilities seriously even when no one was around to see it. Richard watched her pause in the hallway outside Lily's room for nearly a full minute, simply listening to make sure the child's breathing was steady and even before continuing on. Then Maria did something that surprised him. She walked into the small sitting room near the kitchen, a room Richard rarely used, more storage than living space, and pulled out her phone. She sat on the old armchair in the corner, and through the camera's microphone, Richard could just barely make out her voice. She was talking to someone. A video call. "Mama, I'm okay," Maria said softly, her voice carrying a tiredness that hadn't been present all day around Lily. "Yes, the little girl is sleeping. She's sweet. She misses her grandfather so much, Mama. You should see her face light up whenever he walks in the room." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No, I haven't told him yet," Maria said, and something in her voice shifted. Careful, guarded. "I don't want them to worry. I'm managing. The job pays well, and I'm sending most of it home like I promised." Richard leaned closer to his phone screen. "How is Sophia's treatment going?" Maria asked. There was a longer pause this time, longer than Richard liked, and when Maria spoke again, her voice had cracked slightly. Okay, that's good. Tell her I love her. Tell her big sister is working hard and will be home to see her very soon." The call ended a few minutes later, and Maria sat alone in the dim little room for a long time, her face in her hands. Richard's chest ached watching her. He didn't know who Sophia was, a sister, he guessed from the context, but he understood enough. Maria wasn't just an employee collecting a paycheck. She was someone carrying her own quiet burdens, her own worries and fears, while still showing up every single day with warmth and patience for a child who wasn't even hers. He thought about how he'd hired her through an agency, glanced at her references, asked a handful of interview questions about her experience with toddlers, and considered the matter closed. He'd never once asked her about her own life, her own family, what she might be carrying with her into his home every morning. The next morning, the fourth day of his supposed business trip, Richard watched Maria's routine continue exactly as it had been. Patient, warm, attentive. At one point, Lily threw her cereal bowl on the floor in a fit of toddler frustration, and instead of raising her voice, Maria simply knelt down, cleaned the mess without complaint, and said gently, "It's okay, Lilybug. Want to try again? I'll help you hold the spoon steady." It was such a small moment, such an ordinary, unremarkable thing. But it told Richard everything he needed to know. This wasn't a performance. This was simply who Maria was, patient and kind even when exhausted, even when carrying private worries about a sister named Sophia and a treatment that clearly weighed on her, even when no cameras were supposed to be watching and no employer was supposed to be checking up on her. By that afternoon, Richard had made up his mind. The test was over. He felt a deep, uncomfortable shame settle into his stomach, not because Maria had failed in any way, but because he had spent days suspecting and surveilling a woman who deserved nothing but his gratitude and respect. He packed his small hotel bag, called his driver, and headed home, for real this time. But on the way, he made one more phone call, this one to his assistant, asking her to gather some information. Because Richard Hale might have built his fortune on careful business decisions and calculated risks, but he'd also learned, watching those quiet hours of footage, that some debts couldn't be repaid with money alone. Though, as it turned out, money was about to help in a very different way. When Richard's car pulled into the driveway that evening, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time walking up to his own front door. Nervous anticipation, almost like a man returning from a long journey rather than a businessman coming home from a fake trip down the road. He let himself in quietly. The house was warm with the smell of dinner cooking, something simple, pasta, maybe, and he could hear Lily's high-pitched giggling from the kitchen before he even rounded the corner. When Lily saw him, her whole face transformed exactly the way Maria had described it to her during that nap-time conversation he wasn't supposed to have heard. "Grandpa," she shrieked, abandoning her dinner entirely and running toward him on unsteady toddler legs, arms outstretched. Richard scooped her up without hesitation, holding her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and feeling 4 days' worth of worry melt out of his shoulders. "Hello, my little shadow," he murmured into her hair, unconsciously borrowing Maria's words. Over Lily's small shoulder, he caught Maria's eye. She was standing by the stove, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, a warm but slightly tired smile on her face. "Welcome home, Mr. Hale. How was the trip?" Richard hesitated. Lying to her again felt wrong, especially now, especially after everything he'd witnessed. But the full truth, that he'd never left, that he'd been watching her every move through hidden cameras for 4 days, felt like it might shatter whatever fragile trust existed between them, even though it was trust he hadn't fully earned yet either. He settled for something close to the truth. "It was eye-opening," he said carefully. "Maria, can we talk for a moment after Lily's asleep tonight?" Something flickered across Maria's face, a flash of worry, quickly hidden. "Of course," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Richard reassured her, and meant it more than she could possibly know. That night, after Lily had been put to bed, Richard insisting on doing the honors himself this time, reading the same wooden block book 3 times because she demanded it, he found Maria in the kitchen, finishing the last of the cleanup. "Please sit," Richard said, gesturing to the small kitchen table. "I owe you an explanation, and possibly an apology." Maria sat slowly, her expression curious but guarded, the posture of someone used to being cautious around the people who employed her. Richard took a deep breath. "I never went on a business trip," he admitted. "I was at a hotel 10 minutes from here. I have cameras throughout the house for security, I told myself, but really I used them to watch you. To test you. I wanted to see who you really were when you thought no one important was paying attention." To her credit, Maria didn't look angry, though Richard had braced himself for that reaction. Instead, she looked something closer to sad. "I understand," she said quietly. "You're protecting her. I would do the same if she were mine." "That's exactly it," Richard said, surprised by her understanding. "I lost my wife 4 years ago. My son is overseas, building his own life, and rightfully so. She's everything to me. The only piece of softness left in a life that's mostly become spreadsheets and boardrooms. I was terrified of trusting the wrong person with her." "And what did you see?" Maria asked, her voice careful. Richard's eyes grew warm with emotion he didn't bother hiding. "I saw a woman who held my crying granddaughter and told her a story about her own grandfather to comfort her. I saw someone who cleaned up spilled cereal without a single complaint. I saw you check every lock in this house before going to bed, even though you had no reason to think anyone was watching whether you did or not." Maria's eyes had filled with tears now too, though she tried to blink them back. "And I heard your phone call," Richard continued gently. "The one with your mother. About Sophia." Maria's composure broke slightly at that, a small gasp escaping her. "You heard that?" "I did," Richard admitted. "And I am deeply sorry, Maria, for invading your privacy that way. You didn't deserve to be spied on. You deserved trust from the very beginning, and I failed to give you that. But I also can't pretend I didn't learn something important about you and about what you're carrying." Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, composing herself. "Sophia is my younger sister," she said quietly. "She's 9. She has a heart condition. It requires surgery, special doctors, expensive treatments our family back home could never afford on our own. That's why I took this job, Mr. Hale. The pay is good, and I send almost everything home." Richard nodded slowly, his chest tight with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being genuinely needed for something beyond his money, beyond his business acumen, but with the very real possibility that his money could still do enormous good. "Maria," he said carefully, "I would like to help with Sophia's treatment." Maria's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked almost frightened by the offer, as if she expected some hidden cost attached to it. "Mr. Hale, I can't accept that. You barely know me. I'm just your employee." "You're not just my employee," Richard said firmly, leaning forward. "For the past 4 days, You took care of the most precious person in my life better than I could have asked anyone to. You comforted her with your own grief, your own family story, when you thought there was nobody around to perform for. That's not employment, Maria. That's something closer to family, whether either of us planned for it or not." Tears spilled freely down Maria's cheeks now, and she didn't bother hiding them. "I just wanted to do right by her," she whispered. "By Lily. She reminds me so much of Sophia at that age." "Then let me do right by your family the way you've done right by mine," Richard said. "Please. Let me cover Sophia's treatment. Let me bring her and your mother here if that's what you need, so you're not torn between two countries, two families, two sets of worry. There's more than enough room in this house. There always has been. It's just been empty for far too long." Maria broke down completely then, covering her face with her hands as for years, or perhaps her entire adult life, of quiet, careful strength finally cracked under the weight of someone offering to help carry the burden instead of adding to it. Richard didn't know what else to say, so he simply waited, the way he imagined a real grandfather, a real father, a real friend might wait, patiently, without rushing someone through their emotions just because it was uncomfortable to witness. When Maria finally composed herself, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Why would you do all this for someone you've known 3 weeks?" Richard considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I spent 4 days hiding in a hotel room, spying on you through cameras, trying to catch you doing something wrong," he said. "And instead, all I caught you doing was being remarkable over and over again, when you had every reason to think no one would ever know. People don't fake that kind of kindness, Maria. Not for days on end. Not when they're exhausted. Not when they're worried about a little sister back home. That kind of goodness is real, or it doesn't exist at all." He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "I built an empire by being suspicious of everyone, by assuming the worst until proven otherwise. It made me successful, but it also made me lonely. You and Lily, in just 3 weeks, you've shown me there's a different way to live. I'd like to try it if you'll let me." Over the following months, true to his word, Richard arranged for Sophia's heart surgery with the best specialists available, flying the procedure to be performed at a renowned children's hospital. Maria's mother and Sophia eventually moved to a comfortable apartment Richard helped arrange nearby, close enough that Maria could see them on her days off without the impossible distance that had weighed on her for so long. Sophia's surgery was a success. Within a year, she was running and playing exactly like any healthy 9-year-old should, sending Richard handmade thank you cards covered in glitter and crayon hearts that he kept proudly displayed on his office desk, right next to his important business awards, though he privately considered the glitter cards far more valuable. Lily grew up calling Maria Auntie Maria, without anyone ever formally deciding that should be her title. It simply became true, the way family titles sometimes do, earned through years of bedtime stories and skinned knees and quiet comfort during thunderstorms. And Richard Hale, the billionaire who once thought trust was something dangerous to extend freely, who once believed an empty house was simply the price of success, learned something that no business degree or boardroom negotiation had ever taught him, that the people who show you who they truly are when they think no one important is watching are exactly the people worth building a real life around. His house was never empty again, not really. There was always laughter now, always small feet running across hardwood floors, always the smell of cooking that wasn't his own attempt at a sad bachelor dinner, always a sense that the rooms had finally remembered what they were built for in the first place. Not storage for wealth, but space for the kind of love that grows when you're brave enough to stop testing people and simply let them in. Years later, when Lily was old enough to understand the story, Richard told her the whole truth about the fake business trip, about the hidden cameras, about his fear and his suspicion. Lily, by then a thoughtful young girl with her grandmother's eyes, simply hugged him and said, "I'm glad you tested her, Grandpa. Because now we have a whole family instead of just 2 people in a big, lonely house." Richard couldn't have said it better himself.